Marty is a fourth-generation fisherman from Maine. He's also a world-class engineer. Over the last 5 years, he has obsessively worked to build Running Tide to be the fastest-growing carbon removal and ecosystem services company in the world. Marty is going to tell us today about the tremendous opportunity that exists in carbon removal and in ecosystems across markets, and how we can all be involved. And I hope that from the inspiration that Marty is going to provide to us, that we also have a great opportunity here for each of you to reflect on how it might be part of what you're also doing in your respective realms. Now, with that, I think Marty's actually got for us something that's a bit of an inspiration before he comes and speaks, which is a video that we're going to play. So let me get that started, and then Marty will be excited to welcome you up here.
Thank you all. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here in Sweden. And everywhere we've gone in coastal communities, we've seen and heard similar stories that we have here, which is coastal degradation, loss of ecosystem services in coastal waters. Baltic Sea here is suffering just like any other coastal environment around the world. But I'll tell you a little bit about Running Tide. We started the company in 2017 with some cast-offs from the fishing industry and offshore oil and gas exploration. We felt very deeply that there needed to be there's sort of this dichotomy in how the world looked at the ocean and looked at nature. It was, we either fully conserve or we exploit. And it was pretty obvious to us at the time that there had to be a third way of positive intervention. So we started Running Tide to develop the tools, techniques, and infrastructure to do positive interventions, measure them, scale them, turn them into financial instruments, and then integrate into industrial ecosystems to scale to massive levels. Sort of a crazy idea at the time. Not everyone we pitched bought into it. Yuri here did. He's one of our first investors. And so from my backyard to now we've grown to 90 people. I think some of the best investors in the world on our team, and we are rapidly scaling these sort of interventions. Unfortunately, the video got cut off there, and you can see like a lot of the cool technology that we've built, but most of the team is focused on building novel sensor systems, using machine vision to measure a variety of environmental parameters in the ocean, and to design interventions using kelp, shellfish, or geochemical processes to assist in abatement of ocean acidification or the removal of carbon. There's I'll very quickly tell you how, growing up in the fishing industry, both sides of my family is what we've done forever. Spent a lot of time working on boats, solving a lot of hard problems, fixing diesel engines, pneumatic systems, hydraulic systems, etc. And every time you get into, these are low margin businesses, 8% margins. So every minute, every dollar is a fight. And things break, and a trick we learned was you personify the problem. And you pick a fight with it, and then you win, right? So it gets hard sometimes doing, rebuilding a hydraulic pump for the 18th time in, 3 months. But you just you name it, and pick a fight with it, and just don't back down until it's done. And that's how you get through those hard times. So, when we're looking at this massive problem like climate change, so what do you call it? And we named it Godzilla. And, we woke up Godzilla. Humanity woke up Godzilla. We dug up all this carbon from the slow cycle, released energy into the environment, and we summoned a demon. And that demon is, now we're paying the price for it. And coastal communities around the world are feeling this pressure. Farming communities, Godzilla's burning forests and cities and destroying crops, etc. So we named it. That's our fight. And we, it's and I think that this is like the story of Prometheus, right? It's a story that goes back throughout human history where we summon a demon and have to destroy it. So, what is Godzilla? I think this is the scariest chart I've ever seen in my entire life. This Godzilla is zettajoules of energy pouring into the ocean every day. Just heat energy just pouring into the ocean. That's altering weather systems, right? That's altering, we built civilization based on this stable idea or this somewhat stable environmental system. And now this chart right here just shows that it's all going to change. Weather systems are going to shift. Rainfall is going to shift away from areas where we've built up all our farming infrastructure. Sea levels are going to rise. This absolutely gorgeous city here, just like nothing I've ever seen, is going to face sea level rise. And how do we mitigate that? Not all 600 gigatons of carbon went into the ocean, about a third of it, but causing acidification. What are the oceans? Well, that's where we get 50% of our oxygen. And I like breathing, so I kind of like to keep phytoplankton levels really high and at historic levels, and so we have to combat ocean acidification as well. But I think that the takeaway from this, and everyone's heard this before, but we really have to face the fact that civilization is at threat, and it's much cheaper to just solve the damn problem than it is to try to adapt constantly to this for the next 500 years. There is a misconception. The center of the climate system is not the atmosphere, it's the oceans. The oceans are where the energy is stored. And we dumped 600 zettajoules or whatever that is into the ocean, and that's, we have to deal with dumping all that energy into a dynamic system. You dump that much energy into a dynamic system, it reaches instability. So the ocean is also this incredible opportunity for intervention. And that's why, we set up our company to design these positive interventions into the ocean and to make sure that we're able to, and I think the oceans are the front line of this fight. There's no, we can scale things up on land, but there's no Earth system that we're going to be able to intervene in like the oceans, and we'll get to the logistics of that in a bit. For coastal communities like where I'm from, this is not a surprise to any of us. Anybody that has their head outside can see this, but the fish are moving north, they're going deeper. This has perturbations into entire food systems. Most of the world lives close to the ocean. As fisheries collapse, we have to find alternate proteins. If we stopped fishing, all commercial fishing today, we'd have to cut down every rainforest on Earth and plant soybeans to replace that protein production. And that's happening. It's where's the protein going to come from? And what are we going to do with all these coastal communities? So much of the world is based on an interaction with the ocean. So much culture, so much wisdom, intergenerational wisdom is being lost because you're just what stories are relevant anymore? You dump that much energy into the ocean, what stories and what wisdom can I pull from, my grandfather or my father and hand down to my kids relevant to our ecosystem, and the ecosystem is changing faster than we can even adapt to it, right? There's so much loss, so much despair. From all I've seen in my life is decline. in my community, in the waterfront community, and I think that's everywhere around the world. It's just it's just less and less and less every year, less opportunity. So, well, what's happening is the fish are following the Goldilocks zone. And so what the Goldilocks zone is life exists inside this band, and life in the ocean, phytoplankton, everything exists in this band of, not too hot, not too cold, not too acidic, not too basic, where conditions are just right. The fish have fins and they can swim and they'll just keep following. But what happens when you run out of north? What happens if you run out of depth, right? We are faced with that. And like human health, Earth systems in general have a Goldilocks zone. So on the left, you can see my communications officer's lab results. He's got to eat more shellfish because his creatinine is low. But so those are his lab results. A human goes and gets a blood test, and you learn about what's out of balance, what's out of your Goldilocks zone for all these different parameters. And what Running Tide is doing is building the novel sensor systems that allow us to assess ocean health, measure the preconditions, and then we design an intervention, and then measure the post-conditions. And the delta is what we can sell as a carbon credit, as a biodiversity credit, as an ocean acidification credit, what have you. The nitrogen abatement credits in coastal environments where there's excess nitrogen runoff, we can absorb nitrogen into shellfish, create a delta, create a credit, and then sell that on an exchange. But what we're seeing is that just that's all well and good, and that's what we started. We're okay, we'll be able to do all these positive interventions, but what we're seeing, and we are actually seeing this in real time. We are watching our bays where we have these shellfish farms just acidify, and we have these acidification events, and we have all these machine vision cameras measuring every single shellfish as they grow, and we can see them stop growing whenever there's an acidification event. And then we'll get some rainfall to wash the alkaline salts off the land, and then we'll start to get growth again. But it's terrifying to just watch in real time with all of this incredible data, just to watch how sensitive these systems are to these perturbations that to Godzilla, right? So we've developed all these technologies, and really exciting. It's been a phenomenal run. We have an incredibly talented team of SpaceX engineers, jet propulsion laboratories, 52 STEM employees, probably I'd imagine one of the best operations team you could ever ask for. But what do we do with this now that we know this? We have these interventions. What do you do if you have a 90-person team, but you have the biggest problem that's ever existed in all of human history? And I think that that's what we're here to talk about, is how do you hyperscale these. At the end of the day, what we have to do, and carbon removal is what we're talking about here, is we have to move. We created Godzilla by moving carbon from the slow cycle to the fast cycle. And the only way we kill Godzilla is we move all that carbon from the fast cycle back to the slow cycle. Fast cycle is air, ocean, biosphere. Slow cycle, dissolved inorganic carbon in the ocean, geologic reservoirs. You basically have to put carbon dioxide under tremendous pressure, like injecting it underground in saline aquifers, or you turn it into a rock, or you put it into the deep ocean. So that's the slow cycle. So people spend a lot of time talking about all these carbon removal technologies, and they're all great, and I love them all. But at the end of the day, it's straight up just moving mass. That's all we're doing. We're just taking out the garbage. We just moved 600 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. A lot of that ended up in the oceans. We just have to move all of that into the slow cycle. And it's that's just infrastructure and logistics. The technology is a little bit of a lever. All the instruments we've built and the financialization and all of that, those are levers. But at the end of the day, it's just work. It's like a 4-letter word. It's just work. It's actually the literal definition of work, is moving mass. So we have to just move a tremendous amount of mass. 90% of the ton miles of mass we move is moved on the ocean. And this is where we get into like the hardcore logistics of this. All of our infrastructure is aimed at moving things onto ships, right? That's where the rail lines run to ports, right? You load things onto ships. Everything we've built aims at ports. And this is the infrastructure we need to leverage, because we don't have time to build this. You don't build ports and rail lines and massive ships overnight. This is not something that hyperscales like you don't just like build up a server farm and you can increase your search queries by 5 orders of magnitude. This is like pretty hardcore stuff, and we don't have decades. We don't have 40 years to build this stuff. We have to use what we have right now. And what we have right now, we have the infrastructure to move things onto the water, and we need to leverage that. So, my favorite quote of all time is General Omar Bradley from World War II. He's like one of Eisenhower's kind of like chief generals. And he says, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And that's what I'm here to talk about today is what matters is what matters, and what can scale is what fits into the existing logistical frameworks. Like I said, that's moving mass onto the ocean. And the annuals, and this is one of the reasons why we feel very confident that we'll be one of the first carbon removal companies to hit megaton scale and to hit gigaton scale. Is because we've built our system, which I'll talk about next, around the idea of what logistical infrastructure exists and what can we leverage immediately. So, how it works, we make what we call carbon buoys. We take any waste product, terrestrial biomass we can get our hands on. Right now, it's like waste woods. We make buoys out of them. Then we coat them with limestone. So we just make these little they're like tons of the ocean, but core of biomass, coating of limestone. Put them on a ship, bring them out to specific deployment locations around the world, drop them in the water. They spread out on the ocean across tremendous areas, and we spend an enormous amount of time and compute power developing these trajectory models, because we're trying to keep the biggest possible area inside the Goldilocks zone. You can't make an intervention in the ocean in just one area and scale that up, because you pull all the necessary parameters for life out of the Goldilocks zone. So we have to spread this out over a massive area. So we drop these buoys in the water, they spread out over a tremendously huge area that we've mapped very carefully. We grow macroalgae on it, and the limestone dissolves. Okay, so the limestone dissolves, that increases ocean alkalinity, that puts carbon dioxide from dissolved organic carbon in the ocean to dissolved inorganic carbon, which is a slow reservoir. And then we have macroalgae growing that's pulling carbon in from the water, from the upper layer of the ocean. And then when the limestone is mostly dissolved, the water starts infiltrating into the biomass core, fills it full of water, turns it negatively buoyant, and everything sinks. And if we've done our trajectories correctly, we're sinking over 2,000 meters of water, which is below the lowest reach of the thermocline and mixing layer of the ocean, into the deep ocean reservoir. We've successfully done this at very small scales. We've developed we have the first what's called ocean MRV system in the world. We're able to accurately measure what's happening out in the ocean. So we can create a credit off this. Once we create the credit, we're able to sell it on an exchange or directly business to business and take the risk of carbon emissions off people's balance sheets. So that's the system that we've built. What isn't necessarily, so what I like to call, I'm talking about keeping things in the Goldilocks zone. The one thing that's really interesting about the ocean is that you're trying to balance a dynamic system. So your window moves according to time, seasons, space out on the ocean. Different areas of the ocean have different requirements to make the best positive intervention you can make, right? To maximize carbon removal, acidification, maintain phytoplankton levels, etc. You have to be very sensitive and dynamic. So it's a learning system. We're collecting all this data and we're adjusting an intervention, just like we've done in the coastal environments. We do this in the middle of the ocean. So it's a learning system, constantly adapting to what we see and making adjustments. We'll use green algae, like a green macroalgae in one place, a red in the other. Sometimes we mix species. A lot of times we're mixing species. Sometimes we're mixing species on the same buoy. But we're spreading, the aim is to spread millions, billions of these little, sometimes we call it the trillion little garden project. We're spreading these out onto the ocean to, make these minute, very minute adjustments over huge areas. Sometimes we have like one buoy per square kilometer. Small little buoy. So what does that mean? So that's kind of what we've built. I think it's a really promising technology. I think it's one of the more promising and solid first principle based ways to move carbon from the fast cycle to the slow cycle. But the topic of conversation here, the reason why I came out here to talk to all you people is like, what does gigaton scale really mean? And what it means is like that logistics layer. We need raw materials. They must be naturally produced at multi-gigaton scale. Limestone, wood, kelp. These are things that like are in abundance. A third of the Earth's crust is limestone. There's multi-gigatons of woody biomass or waste agriculture, and then there's no first principles limit on what kelp, how much kelp you can grow. It's just a matter of making sure that you can keep all those fundamental ocean parameters inside that Goldilocks zone. So you just have to make all the minute adjustments over time. Energy, we're not asking to build. We use some energy in the buoy factory and moving ships around, but it's minute compared to the energy that we get from natural systems. The sun, Earth's rotation, creating ocean currents, thermohaline, distribution of water around the world, and then we use gravity to put the carbon that we've pulled into the buoy under tremendous pressure. We're not pumping it underwater, we're just letting gravity do the work, sink it to the deep ocean where it's under tremendous pressure, 5,500 psi. That's what powers our operation. We're not running out of any of those, so that's a good thing. Now, and then in order to hyperscale, we need a carbon negative industrial policy. We need to integrate, we need to take what we're doing and integrate it into the existing industrial ecosystems of the world. And what we need to do is the scale of World War II production, that production rate that the US went through to supply World War II, we need to do that. Instead of doing it for 3.5 years, we need to do it for 20 years. That will ultimately integrate into monetary policy. Carbon removal is going to be it's going to take multi-trillions of dollars every year for 20 years, and the only way to do that is that's going to affect monetary policy. We also need just smart policy around permitting infrastructure, allowing port infrastructure to get built quickly, adapt to these new material flows. This is a poster from World War II, and I think that that's really exactly the sentiment that we need now. It's production or destruction. We either produce, hopefully the smokestacks are going in the other direction, but we either produce or, Godzilla comes for everything, all for us. What does that mean for investment? This is a really interesting thing. Because we sell carbon removal credits right now at $250 per ton, but we have to account for all the emissions in the entire process. Our internal cost of carbon is $250 per ton. That's really profound. We're the first kind of companies in the world, these carbon removal companies are the first companies to realize the full cost of carbon. We have the highest incentive of any company to decarbonize our supply chain. We're doing this right now. We're standing up our first operation in Iceland. We are highly incentivized to electrify every piece of the puzzle and tap into clean energy. I think investors who understand this, that carbon removal companies are the best lever for decarbonization. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for investors who realize that. We'll get the greatest carbon leverage per dollar invested. I'm convinced of it, because we're paying the highest cost right now. So, yeah, finally, I think that carbon removal is the only path forward, and I understand that, 30 years ago, I think saying carbon removal is a moral hazard might have been right, but I've already seen the destruction. I've seen it in my community. I wouldn't be here if this problem wouldn't be here. I'd be fishing and I'd be happy. Instead I'm miserable. I'm miserable and working all the time. It's too late. It's too late for any other. We have to decarbonize as rapidly as possible. We have to build all the renewable energies we can, but we have to remove carbon. Center of mass of science, IPCC report, National Academy of Science. We have to do carbon removal, and we have to scale it faster than we've scaled anything ever. So, so I just, hopefully everyone. The only thing I want people to take away is to keep us in the Goldilocks zone. We have to bury Godzilla, and we do that by moving gigatons of carbon from the fast cycle to the slow cycle. It's just work, and the alternative is to move Earth further away from the sun, which is a terrible mass transfer efficiency. Bad idea. So, here we go. That's all legal.
Marty, thank you. That was both fantastic, enlightening, and a little bit scary all at the same time. I have some questions, and I meant what I said. Audience participation, please. So we have time for a few questions, and the best ones will get asked, not to create any competition amongst you all. But let me get us started. And Marty, why don't we sit down if you want? I can consider what you're doing. It might be a bit more comfortable. First question I have for you here from the audience. How big can running tide and the broader nature-based removals be?
We can do all of it.
What does that look like in two parts? One, climate impact in what time frame? And then two, the scale of infrastructure that you described and how that has to scale.
Okay, so the time frame is, the time frame is a wild card. I don't think that we're really going to be able to understand the one thing that I want to really hit on is that you have to keep ultra local impacts are actually really dangerous. You have to spread these things over huge amounts of area, and there are going to be limitations of the rate at which we can do this. I don't think we know what that rate is. I don't think that we'll be able to do that until we're operating at a far greater scale. We'll be able to understand what, how many gigatons per year we can do. But first principles of, limestone dissolution, I'll say biomass sinking. Right now, 200 megatons of terrestrial biomass float out of rivers and into the deep ocean every year, and that's a fraction of historic levels, right? We've dammed all these rivers, we've done all this deforestation, we have farms lining all these riverbanks instead of forests. So it's not exactly clear, and we don't have historic records really. We can kind of infer in the deep ocean, what those levels, what those rates were, but. Suffice to say, we can ramp up significantly on that end of things before we bump into any carrying capacity constraints. Yesterday, I know that people were talking about how much terrestrial biomass we can grow, how much land we'll run out of. Well, you can also just if you afforest an area or reforest an area, you can also just cut that forest back down, and then put that into storage. Whether you're doing a charm technology where you're creating oil and then injecting that into the ground, or you're burying the wood, or you're, sinking into the deep ocean. Those are all, viable and, effectively sinking things into the deep ocean is quite natural. That's been happening for a long time. Limestone dissolution. I always consider that the base case of carbon removal and fighting ocean acidification. If you really just had to stop carbon removal right now, if the whole world just decided, pulled the panic button, the best thing to do is just grind up 3 Mount Fuji's worth of limestone and spread it out into high latitude oceans and dissolve it into the top layer of the ocean. That does the job, but you have to do that at a certain rate that doesn't pull anything out of the Goldilocks zone, so that's the limiting factor. In terms of infrastructure, it looks like the Liberty Ship program. This looks like massive scale. That's World War II built, I think 1,800 vessels to support the logistical needs of these armies around the world. And it'll look very similar to that. You'll just be taking forestry, mining, waterfront communities and just turning them up to 11. Right now they're at like 1. if we started when I was like 6, when I was a kid, we're at like 1 right now, but you just light all these communities up and scale it up as rapidly as possible. It will feel like a step change for everyone involved. It'll be totally unlike anything that anybody has living memory of in order to do this right. So.
And maybe just to follow on to that last part, in the audience here, I know we have some infrastructure investors, we have folks who are coming from companies that have massive infrastructure, global infrastructure. How are you engaging with those kinds of folks today?
Yeah, we've just been initiating some conversations recently. We feel like we've got to a point now where we started up our first operations are coming online in Iceland with the support of the Icelandic government and some fantastic partners we have there, Transition Labs. So now that we have that first operation starting, it's actually fantastic because you start to really learn this is hard. Moving mass is hard. It's work, and we're all, the core of the company is from an industrial background, steel toes, hard hats. But when faced with just the massive scale here, you realize, okay, we need to find the partners. We need to find the investors who are comfortable investing in industrial infrastructure. For us, we can sell every credit we could ever produce right now. That's what it feels like. My sales team literally sold out in a month. I think they really were pushing it for about a month, and then we were like, okay, stop, because we have to actually build all this infrastructure to support this. So we're engaging in these talks right now with partners around the world, and I think there's going to be a learning curve for us as a small startup to integrate with these kind of giants. But that's what we aimed at this from the beginning, and now we're just taking a step up. So we'll see.
It's great. I'm jumping the order of some of the questions here, but one of the questions, I understand you're already entering European markets. What markets are you in? Where would you like to be? How can we help?
I want to be in every market. I want to be everywhere in the world tomorrow. There's obviously physical limitations to how fast we can go, but that's a matter of finding the right partners. We're really excited about the European market. It's thrilling to come from the U.S. where things are moving, but slowly. There's so much skepticism about the even need or misconceptions about what's required, and to come to Europe. And I think that there's just especially on the corporate side, people here are factor CO2 emissions heavily on their balance sheet. They consider the risks heavily, and they understand what the implications are for them on a long-term basis. I think companies think a lot further forward here. They make investments based on longer investment timelines, and I think they can see, over the next cycle of capital infrastructure that they build, the carbon emissions of that infrastructure is a huge risk to their balance sheet. So they're looking to partner with companies like us that can mitigate the carbon risk on their balance sheet.
What's the business model for Running Tide? You've got this appropriate but unreasonable expectation about time and scale, and then you're starting from incredible progress in just a few years. But as you touch all these different geographies, and if you engage with all these players who have infrastructure, what's the model? Are you IP and technology? Are you a market aggregator for them? It's a
fantastic question. I think that that's part. I think that's going to be as a case-by-case basis as we enter into each new market and each new geography. We're going to have to assess the capabilities of our partner. I will tell you, if people won't partner with me, and I have to do this on my own, give me a hammer and I'll make big limestone rocks into little limestone rocks and throw them in the ocean by myself. But if I can partner with people who can increase our capabilities, I will do that on a case-by-case basis. I think eventually once we'll establish a replicable model, once we've done it a few times with different partnerships, we won't do anything. But like right now in ISO, we're doing almost everything ourselves. With our friends and allies, but I think that's going to be a case-by-case basis. And ideally we would be the IP and intelligence layer that can accelerate these giant companies into this space. I think that would be my ideal highest leverage point to accelerate as fast as possible.
We clearly inspired some folks because two of the questions were I already said how can we help, another one how can we get involved and support your work. What do you say? What do you say to people who ask that first?
Yeah, come and talk to us. We can put a lot of capital to work. I really believe that. I think that the market is completely supply constrained, and it will be it will be infinitely at the current rate of progress. So, we can put a lot of capital to work. We can decarbonize our supply chains. I feel really confident in getting rates of return to investors. But otherwise, it's just going to have to be, come and communicate with us. We're open for business. We're ready to go. So.
Wonderful. We're at time.
Okay.
Marty, thank you. This was fabulous and really a gift to all of us, I think, in terms of coming here and sharing it with us. So thank you for doing that, and really appreciate the time for us all.